Captain Lee Daeho stood in the command center of his ship called Nu, Seoul, watching the black space around them fill with massive alien vessels. The enemy ships were 10 times bigger than his small exploration craft, and they moved like giant metal sharks circling their prey. His crew of 40 humans had been exploring this distant star system when the aliens appeared without warning. Their ships came out of nowhere like ghosts materializing from the darkness. The alien vessels were covered in sharp spikes and glowing red lights that made them look like floating nightmares. The communication screen in front of Daeho flickered to life, showing the most terrifying creature he had ever seen. The alien had 4 muscular arms covered in dark scales. Its head was massive, with rows of razor-sharp teeth and glowing yellow eyes that seemed to burn with hatred. When it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding metal mixed with the roar of an angry beast. "We are the mighty Vortani Empire," the creature announced. "We have conquered 12 different species across this galaxy. You humans will surrender your ship and your world, or we will destroy everything you have ever loved. This has always been our way. Submit now or watch your people die in the flames of our weapons." The alien commander leaned closer to the camera, showing more of its horrifying face. "We have done this many times before," it continued. "Small, weak species like yours always try to fight us with their pathetic weapons. They fire their guns and launch their missiles thinking they can win through traditional combat. But we are stronger, we are faster, we are better. Every species that has tried to fight us the normal way has been crushed like insects under our boots, Captain." Daeho looked around at his crew members. He saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. He saw the same stubborn determination that had helped humans survive ice ages and world wars and every disaster their planet had ever thrown at them. Lieutenant Park So-young, his second in command, stepped closer to his chair. She was a small woman with short black hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Captain," she whispered, "what are your orders? These aliens clearly expect us to either surrender or start shooting at them with everything we have." Daeho smiled in a way that would have made the alien commander very nervous if it had understood human expressions. "We are going to do something they will never expect," he said quietly. "We are going to fight them, but not the way they think fighting works." He turned to his communications officer, Ensign Kim Taemin, who was barely 20 years old and looked terrified. "Kim, I want you to access our entire music database. Find the most annoying, repetitive songs we have, the ones that get stuck in your head and make you want to scream, then broadcast them on every frequency these aliens are using. Make it so loud they cannot ignore it." Kim stared at his captain like he had lost his mind. "Sir, I do not understand. How will music help us fight giant alien warships?" "Trust me," Daeho replied. "Just do it and make sure the volume is turned up as high as our systems can handle." While Kim worked frantically at his console, Daeho turned to Lieutenant Park So-young, "I need you to prepare all of our construction probes," he said quietly. "The ones we use for building space stations and repairing hull damage, but I want you to program them to do the opposite. Instead of building things up, I want them to take things apart piece by piece." Park looked confused. "Sir, those probes are not weapons. They are just tools for construction work. How can they fight against military starships?" Daeho grinned. "Exactly. That is why this will work. The aliens expect weapons. They expect missiles and energy beams and all the normal things that military ships use in space battles. They do not expect construction equipment to attack them." The alien commander on the screen was getting impatient. "You have 30 seconds to surrender," it growled, "or we will demonstrate why no species has ever successfully resisted the Vortani Empire. Your small ship will be vaporized in the first wave of our attack." Instead of answering with words, Daeho nodded to Kim Taemin, who activated the music broadcast system. Suddenly, every communication channel the aliens were using was flooded with the most irritating pop songs from Earth. The alien commander's threatening speech was cut off and replaced with bouncy electronic music and singers repeating the same simple phrases over and over again. The effect on the alien ships was immediate and hilarious. Their communication systems, which were designed to handle military frequencies and battle coordinates, could not filter out the music. The alien commander tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by cheerful songs about love and dancing and other completely non-military topics. On the viewing screen, Daeho could see the alien commander becoming more and more frustrated. The creature was shouting something, but nobody could hear it over the music. Other aliens were running around their bridge, pushing buttons and trying to make the song stop, but nothing worked while the aliens were distracted trying to deal with the musical attack. Lieutenant Park launched 12 small construction probes. These tiny machines looked like harmless metal spheres with mechanical arms. They moved slowly toward the alien ships, looking like floating pieces of space junk. The probes were programmed with the blueprints of typical military spacecraft. They knew exactly where to find the most important structural components. Once they reached the alien ships, they began working just like they would on any construction project. Except instead of putting things together, they started taking everything apart. The alien warships were held together by millions of bolts, rivets, and welded joints. The construction probes treated each joint like a problem to be solved. They used their tools to carefully remove every connection point they could find, working systematically from one section to another on the bridge of the New Sol. The crew watched in amazement as pieces of the enemy ships began floating away into space. The aliens inside were probably wondering why their vessels were falling apart around them, but the music was so loud they could not coordinate any response. Captain Deho had turned basic engineering into the most effective form of psychological warfare the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens had come expecting a traditional space battle with explosions and dramatic weapon exchanges. Instead, they found their ships being quietly dismantled by what appeared to be maintenance equipment, while annoying music played endlessly in their ears. The largest alien warship was the first to completely fall apart. Its hull plating drifted away in neat sections while its internal systems sparked and failed. The other alien vessels tried to retreat, but their own ships were already too damaged to move properly. Within 2 hours, the entire Vortani invasion fleet was floating in pieces around the New Sol. The aliens who survived had to be rescued by their own emergency pods. They looked completely defeated and utterly confused about what had just happened to them. This was humanity's first lesson to the galaxy. When you cannot win with traditional weapons, you win by thinking in ways your enemy never imagined. The Vortani Empire had conquered 12 species using overwhelming force and standard military tactics, but they had never encountered a species that treated warfare like a creative problem-solving exercise. Captain Lee Deho looked at his crew and smiled. "We just changed the rules of how wars are fought in this galaxy," he said. "From now on, every alien species will have to consider whether humans might do something completely unexpected." Galaxy was about to learn that humans never fight fair because humans never fight the same way twice. News about the strange human victory over the Vortani Empire spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Most alien species dismissed the story as impossible propaganda. They could not believe that construction tools and annoying music had defeated one of the most feared military forces in known space. But Dr. Kim Min SEO knew the truth, and she understood what it meant for humanity's future. Dr. Kim was Earth's smartest military strategist, a woman who had spent her entire career studying how wars were won and lost. She had watched the video recordings from Captain Lee Deho's ship dozens of times, analyzing every detail of the encounter. What she saw convinced her that humanity had accidentally discovered something revolutionary. The problem was that Captain Lee's victory had been mostly luck and quick thinking. If humans were going to survive in a galaxy full of hostile alien empires, they needed to turn unconventional warfare into a science. They needed to study it, practice it, and teach it to others. That was why Dr. Kim established the Academy of Unconventional Warfare on the Moon in a series of underground chambers that had once been mining facilities. The location was perfect because it was hidden from alien surveillance and had plenty of space for the strangest military training program ever created. The first challenge was finding the right students. Traditional military academies looked for people with excellent physical fitness, strong discipline, and years of combat experience. Dr. Kim's academy needed something completely different. She wanted creative thinkers, problem solvers, and people who could see solutions that others would miss. The first class included former circus performers who understood how to distract audiences and create illusions, video game designers who knew how to think in terms of rules, systems, and unexpected strategies, street magicians who specialized in misdirection and making impossible things seem real, professional comedians who understood timing and how to make people react in predictable ways, even former con artists, who knew how to manipulate psychology and make people believe things that were not true. Their instructor was Colonel Choi Jae-min, a legendary figure in Earth's military who had earned his reputation through the most unusual combat record in human history. He had once ended a bar fight by folding paper napkins into origami shapes that somehow convinced 6 drunk soldiers to stop fighting and start discussing art. He had talked an entire enemy patrol into surrendering by pretending to be a lost tourist asking for directions. Colonel Choi's teaching method was simple but effective. He told his students to forget everything they thought they knew about warfare. Instead of studying famous battles and military tactics, they would approach combat like children playing games. The goal was not to destroy the enemy, but to confuse them so completely that they would defeat themselves. Student Yang Haijin had been a professional escape artist before joining the academy. She could get out of handcuffs, straitjackets, and locked boxes faster than most people could tie their shoes. Under Colonel Choi's guidance, she developed techniques for making entire human armies disappear from enemy detection systems. Her method involved modified camping equipment that could bend light and sound in unexpected ways. Combined with careful positioning and timing, she could make hundreds of soldiers vanish in plain sight. Enemy commanders would watch their sensors show empty space while human forces moved freely around them. The aliens would question their own equipment, their own eyes, and eventually their own sanity. Meanwhile, Cadet Lim Tae-wook brought his background as a professional comedian to military science. He understood that laughter was one of the most powerful weapons in the human arsenal, but he also knew that confusion could be even more effective. His specialty became psychological warfare programs that convinced enemy soldiers their own equipment was haunted or cursed. Lim's methods involves strategic use of sound effects that would play at random times from hidden speakers, optical illusions created with mirrors and holographic projectors that made alien weapons appear to move by themselves, carefully timed equipment malfunctions that would happen just when enemy troops were most nervous about supernatural activity. The result was that alien soldiers would become afraid of their own gear. They would refuse to use weapons that seemed to have minds of their own. They would spend more time looking over their shoulders for ghosts than watching for human attacks. Some entire enemy units would abandon their posts rather than face equipment they believed was possessed by evil spirits. Professor Song Mi-ra brought a different kind of genius to the academy. She had been a mathematician and computer programmer before the war, and she discovered that human logic could be used as a weapon against alien artificial intelligence. Most alien battle computers were designed to process information quickly and efficiently, but they could not handle impossible problems. Professor Song developed surrender negotiation protocols that were actually mathematical paradoxes disguised as diplomatic communications. She would send messages to enemy computers asking them to calculate things like the exact number of ways to be slightly pregnant or the precise weight of the color blue or the square root of negative happiness, while alien artificial intelligence systems crashed or froze trying to solve these impossible equations. Human forces would have plenty of time to reposition for devastating surprise attacks. Enemy commanders would find their computers showing error messages or displaying random nonsense just when they needed tactical information most desperately. The Academy's strangest success story was the development of what Colonel Choi called reality warfare. This involved making the enemy question whether what they were experiencing was actually happening at all. Students learned to create situations so bizarre and unexpected that alien commanders would assume they were hallucinating or dreaming. Advanced students practiced scenarios where they would make enemy forces believe they were fighting in a completely different location or time period. Some exercises involved convincing aliens that they had accidentally invaded a peaceful farming planet instead of a military installation. Others focused on making enemy troops think they had been transported to an alternate dimension where the laws of physics worked differently. The galaxy's military analysts began to notice disturbing patterns in reports from conflicts involving humans. Every engagement seemed to follow different rules than the previous one. Human tactics would change not just between battles, but sometimes in the middle of individual fights. Enemy commanders who thought They had figured out human strategy would find themselves facing completely new approaches. What the aliens did not understand was that the Academy of Unconventional Warfare was teaching its students that warfare itself was just another form of creative expression. There were no fixed rules, no standard procedures, and no limits on what methods could be used as long as they achieved the desired result. The Academy's graduation ceremony was itself a lesson in unconventional thinking. Instead of traditional military parades or formal presentations, students were required to demonstrate their skills by convincing the visiting alien observers that the entire ceremony was actually an elaborate practical joke. The aliens would leave confused about whether they had witnessed a military graduation or been victims of an incredibly sophisticated prank. Dr. Kim Minesio watched her first class of graduates with pride. They represented something new in galactic history, a military force trained not to fight harder or better, but to fight in ways that no enemy could predict or counter. They had learned that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not technology or firepower, but the ability to make your opponent question everything. They thought they knew about reality. The Academy of Unconventional Warfare had succeeded in its mission. It had taken humanity's accidental discovery from the first alien encounter and turned it into a systematic approach to warfare. The graduates would go on to train others, spreading unconventional tactics throughout Earth's military forces. As the Academy's motto stated on a sign above the main entrance, there is no problem so complex that it cannot be solved by approaching it from an angle that makes no sense to anyone else. This philosophy would soon reshape not just human military doctrine, but the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The Korathi Trade Federation controlled the busiest shipping routes in the galaxy for over 200 years. They were masters of economic warfare who could strangle entire star systems by cutting off their supply lines. When they decided to teach humanity a lesson about respecting established galactic commerce, they thought victory would be simple and quick. Their plan was elegant in its brutality. The Korathi would establish blockades around Earth and every human colony world, preventing any ships from entering or leaving human space. Within months, the humans would run out of food, medicine, and raw materials. They would be forced to surrender or watch their civilization collapse from starvation and disease. The Korathi had used this same strategy against 7 other species with perfect success. Each time, the desperate enemy would try to fight through the blockades with military escorts protecting their cargo ships. Each time, the Korathi battle fleets would destroy the escorts and capture the cargo. The economic strangulation would continue until surrender became inevitable. But when the Korathi established their blockades around human space, they encountered something they had never seen before. Captain Nam Sujin and her revolutionary approach to interstellar commerce that turned every merchant vessel into a weapon of confusion and misdirection. Nam had been a logistics coordinator before the war, someone who specialized in moving cargo through impossible situations. She had organized supply lines during natural disasters, coordinated relief efforts in war zones, and managed inventory for companies that operated across multiple continents. Her genius was not in fighting, but in finding ways to get things from one place to another, no matter what obstacles stood in the way. When faced with alien blockades, Nam realized that the Korathi were expecting humans to behave like every other species they had defeated. They expected desperate attempts to break through with military force or pathetic negotiations for mercy. Instead, Nam decided to treat the blockades like just another logistics problem that could be solved through creative thinking and careful planning. Her first innovation was the disguise fleet. Instead of trying to fight past alien checkpoints, her merchant ships would simply pretend to be something other than what they actually were. The transformations were so convincing that even human crews sometimes forgot what their real mission was supposed to be. Cargo vessels carrying military supplies would arrive at blockade points looking exactly like luxury cruise ships, complete with fake passengers taking photographs and complaining about the quality of the artificial gravity. Her crews had studied acting techniques and improvisation skills until they could maintain their false identities even under close questioning from suspicious alien inspectors. The most successful deception involved Lieutenant Commander Park Dong-hyen, whose cargo ship had been carrying advanced weapon systems to a besieged human colony. When stopped by a Korathi patrol fleet, he convinced them that his vessel was actually a religious pilgrimage ship carrying sacred artifacts from Earth to a holy shrine on a distant world. Park had prepared for this possibility by studying Korathi religious beliefs and cultural taboos. He knew that the aliens considered themselves spiritually enlightened beings who respected the religious practices of other species. His fake artifacts were actually weapon components disguised to look like ceremonial objects. Blessed by imaginary human priests, the Korathi patrol commander was so impressed by the apparent devotion of the human pilgrims that he offered to provide an escort through the blockade to ensure their safe passage to the shrine. Only after the weapons had been successfully delivered did the aliens realize that the sacred artifacts were actually advanced plasma cannons, and the holy shrine was a military diplomat's favorite technique, became known as bureaucratic warfare. When her ships were stopped by alien patrol vessels, her crews would produce thousands of fake forms, permits, and regulations, all written in the most confusing legal language. They could create the documents looked official and important, but were actually just random words arranged to sound like bureaucratic procedures. Alien commanders who tried to process the paperwork would find themselves drowning in regulations that made no logical sense, trading permits that required approval from offices that did not exist, environmental impact studies for cargo that was supposedly being transported to planets in completely different galaxies, bills of lading that listed the weight of the cargo in units that had never been invented, while confused alien officers spent hours or sometimes days trying to understand the meaningless documents. Human ships would slip past their blockades. The aliens were so focused on trying to figure out whether the paperwork was legitimate that they forgot to actually inspect the cargo or check the ship's destinations. The bureaucratic warfare technique reached its peak when Nam created a fake interstellar shipping company called Universal Logistics Solutions that existed only on paper. The company had official letterhead, impressive credentials, and a complex organizational structure that made it appear to be one of the largest cargo haulers in the galaxy. Every human merchant ship began carrying documents showing they were contractors for Universal Logistics Solutions, working under regulations established by the completely fictional Galactic Commerce Authority. The aliens spent enormous amounts of time and resources trying to verify these fake credentials, while human supply lines operated freely throughout the blockaded systems. Nam's most audacious deception involved disguising an entire supply convoy as a traveling circus. The ships were painted in bright colors and decorated with fake advertising for the amazing interstellar entertainment spectacular, featuring death-defying performers from across the known galaxy. Military supplies were hidden inside what appeared to be circus equipment, while human soldiers dressed as clowns, acrobats, and animal trainers. When the convoy was stopped by Korathi patrol ships, the fake circus performers put on an impromptu show that was so entertaining the alien officers invited their friends to come watch. The human soldiers had trained extensively in circus skills, and their performances were genuinely impressive. The aliens were having so much fun watching the show that they completely forgot they were supposed to be enforcing a military blockade. The circus convoy technique worked so well that Nam expanded it into a permanent operation. She established the Galactic Entertainment Network, a fake company that provided shows and performances throughout the galaxy. Human supply ships would travel openly through enemy territory, advertising their entertainment services, while secretly delivering weapons, food, and medical supplies to besieged colonies. The psychological impact on the Korathi was devastating. They had built their reputation on the ability to control interstellar commerce through superior force and strategic positioning, but humans had somehow turned trade itself into a form of guerrilla warfare that made traditional blockade tactics completely ineffective. Korathi commanders found themselves in impossible situations. They would detect human ships approaching their blockades, but could never be certain whether they were looking at legitimate merchants, circus performers, religious pilgrims, or military vessels. In disguise, every inspection became a complex investigation that required analyzing paperwork, studying cultural practices, and trying to determine whether seemingly innocent cargo might actually be weapons. The final blow to Korathi morale came When they realized that some of their own officers had begun looking forward to visits from human ships, the fake entertainment shows had become so popular that alien crews would compete for assignments to inspection duty, hoping to see the latest performances. The blockade had turned into the galaxy's most exclusive entertainment venue after 6 months of trying to maintain blockades that had become indistinguishable from comedy festivals, trade shows, and religious gatherings. The Korathi Trade Federation officially abandoned their economic warfare campaign against humanity. They issued a public statement claiming that human commerce was too unpredictable and chaotic to be effectively controlled through traditional methods. What they really meant was that humans had made it impossible to tell the difference between legitimate trade and military operations. Every merchant ship might be carrying weapons, every circus might be hiding soldiers, and every religious ceremony might be cover for strategic supply deliveries. The Korathi had lost control of their own blockades because they could no longer trust their own perceptions of reality. Captain Nam Sujin had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. She had defeated a military strategy through superior logistics and creative thinking. Her merchant fleet revolution proved that humans could turn any situation into an advantage, simply by refusing to accept that situations had fixed rules or limitations. The galaxy's trade networks would never be the same. Every species now had to consider the possibility that any merchant vessel they encountered might be something completely different from what it appeared to be. The age of predictable interstellar commerce had ended, and the age of creative logistics had begun. The Zephyr War Council had spent 3 years studying every human military victory, analyzing every unconventional tactic, and preparing for what they believed would be the final confrontation. They assembled the largest invasion fleet in galactic history, with over 2,000 warships carrying enough firepower to reduce entire planets to ash. Their plan was simple: overwhelming force applied so quickly that humans would not have time to devise any of their strange tricks. Admiral Keth Zorven commanded the Zephyr fleet with absolute confidence. His species had conquered 47 different worlds, using traditional military superiority. They had never encountered an enemy that could withstand their massive battle formations and devastating weapon systems. The Admiral believed that human unconventional tactics only worked against smaller forces that could be confused or misdirected, but humans had never faced an invasion fleet of this size. Either Admiral Wang Kyung-soo, commanding Earth's defense forces, knew that no amount of creativity could overcome such overwhelming numerical superiority in a direct confrontation. Instead, he developed the most audacious battle plan in military history, one that would turn the entire concept of warfare upside down. When the Zephyr fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, expecting to encounter desperate human defenders preparing for a final stand, they found something that made absolutely no sense. Human ships were positioned throughout the system, but instead of battle formations, they were arranged like party decorations. Colorful lights flashed in patterns that spelled out welcome messages in multiple languages. The human fleet was broadcasting music, not military communications, but actual celebration songs from Earth's cultural archives. Fireworks were exploding in space, creating brilliant displays that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. Every human vessel was behaving as if the massive alien invasion was actually a long-awaited festival. Admiral Zorven stared at the tactical displays in complete bewilderment. His war computers had no protocols for dealing with enemies who treated invasion fleets like honored guests. Zephyr had prepared for desperate resistance, heroic last stands, or immediate surrender, but not for what appeared to be a welcoming party. The situation became even more confusing when the humans began broadcasting formal invitations to the Zephyr ship's commander. Chun Hae-won, leading the newly created Diplomatic Chaos Division, sent personally addressed messages to every alien vessel inviting their crews to participate in traditional Earth celebrations. The invitations were incredibly detailed, including information about proper dress codes, gift exchange, customs, and etiquette rules for interacting with human hosts. They explained that Earth was honored to receive such distinguished visitors and looked forward to sharing cultural experiences with representatives of the mighty Zephyr Empire. Some invitations included recipes for traditional Earth foods that the aliens might enjoy during their visit. Others contained suggested itineraries for sightseeing tours of Earth's most famous landmarks. Several messages offered to arrange transportation for Zephyr officers who wanted to experience human entertainment districts. The psychological impact on the Zephyr fleet was immediate and devastating. Their entire military doctrine was based on intimidation and overwhelming force designed to break enemy morale before the actual fighting began. But humans were responding to intimidation with hospitality and treating overwhelming force like an impressive parade. Admiral Zorvan found himself in an impossible position. His invasion fleet had been trained to respond to military resistance, but not to party invitations. His officers were asking questions he could not answer. Were the humans surrendering or celebrating? Had they gone insane from fear, or were they implementing some incomprehensible strategy? The confusion deepened when human ships began approaching the Zephyr fleet in small groups, carrying what appeared to be gifts and party supplies. Instead of weapons, they carried decorative banners, food containers, and entertainment equipment. The approaching vessels were broadcasting cheerful music, and their crews were waving enthusiastically at the alien ships. Captain Bei Young-ho commanded one of these approaching vessels, but his mission was not actually to deliver party supplies. While his ship looked like a festive celebration vessel, it was actually a sophisticated reconnaissance platform, gathering detailed intelligence about Zephyr ship designs, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities. The same pattern was repeated throughout the human fleet. Every ship that approached the aliens under the guise of party preparations was actually conducting military surveillance. The Zephyr were so confused by the apparent celebration that they allowed human vessels to get close enough to scan their entire fleet. Meanwhile, the real military preparation was happening in locations the aliens never thought to examine. Every piece of space debris in the solar system, every abandoned satellite, and every seemingly harmless asteroid was actually a disguised weapon platform. Human engineers had spent months converting junk into weapons and positioning them throughout the system. The Zephyr fleet was so focused on the bizarre party happening around them that they never noticed the growing number of hidden weapons surrounding their ships. The aliens were trying so hard to understand human behavior that they forgot to maintain proper military vigilance. The turning point came when Commander Chun sent a special invitation to Admiral Zorvan himself, asking him to attend a formal dinner on Earth, where he could meet with human leaders to discuss cultural exchange opportunities. The message was so polite and respectful that the Admiral found himself actually considering whether to accept, while Admiral Zorvan was trying to decide whether the dinner invitation was a trap, a surrender offer, or genuine hospitality. The hidden weapon platforms throughout the solar system quietly moved into final positions. Every piece of fake debris was now a loaded gun pointed at the invasion fleet. The battle officially began when the humans revealed their true strategy. All the party decorations were actually targeting systems. All the celebration music contained coded military communications. All the gift-bearing ships were actually command and control vessels coordinating the largest ambush in galactic history. The Zephyr found themselves surrounded by weapons they had never seen coming. Their massive fleet was trapped in the middle of a solar system that had been transformed into one enormous trap disguised as a welcome celebration. The aliens realized too late that they had been completely outmaneuvered by an enemy that had turned the entire concept of warfare into performance. Admiral Zorvan watched his tactical displays show thousands of weapon signatures appearing from locations his scouts had dismissed as harmless debris. The humans had somehow hidden an entire defense network in plain sight by making it look like party preparations. The invasion fleet was surrounded by enemies they had never noticed. The Zephyr tried to fight back, but their formations were optimized for traditional space combat, not for dealing with weapons platforms disguised as asteroids and satellites. Their large ships were too slow to avoid the hidden weapons and too confused to coordinate effective responses. The battle lasted only 4 hours, but it would be remembered as the moment when traditional military thinking became obsolete. The largest invasion fleet in galactic history was defeated not by superior firepower but by superior deception. The humans had won by making their enemies so confused about what was happening that they forgot to fight effectively when the surviving Zephany ships finally retreated. They left behind not just military equipment but their entire understanding of how wars were supposed to work. The defeat was so complete and so humiliating that other alien species began to question whether their own military strategies were adequate for dealing with human creativity. Admiral Won Kyung-soo had proven that humans could defeat any enemy regardless of numerical superiority by simply refusing to fight the way their enemies expected. The Battle of Broken Expectations became the template for all future human military operations. Every engagement would begin with the assumption that the enemy's expectations were the first target to be destroyed. The galactic military establishment would never recover from the psychological impact of watching the most powerful invasion fleet in history defeated by what appeared to be party planners and event coordinators. The age of traditional warfare had ended, and the age of impossible victories had begun. Dr. Shin Yoon-ji never intended to become the galaxy's most important psychologist. She had been studying human behavior patterns when the first reports started arriving about alien military officers suffering complete mental breakdowns after fighting humans. These were not ordinary cases of combat stress or battle fatigue, but something entirely new that she decided to call human confusion syndrome. The symptoms were unlike anything seen before in galactic medical history. Highly trained military commanders who had successfully led thousands of battles would suddenly become unable to make basic tactical decisions. They would stare at battlefield reports for hours trying to understand how their enemies had accomplished impossible things. Some officers developed obsessive behaviors like repeatedly checking their equipment to make sure it was working properly. The most severe cases involved Zephany commanders from the Battle of Broken Expectations. Admiral Keth Zorvan himself had been found in his quarters 3 days after the battle, arranging and rearranging party invitations he had received from humans. He kept muttering about whether he should have brought a gift and what the proper dress code might have been for attending a celebration during an invasion. Dr. Shin realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. An entire species whose approach to conflict was so alien to normal thinking that exposure to it caused psychological trauma. In other intelligent beings, her research revealed that most alien species had evolved predictable patterns of aggression based on competition for resources, territory, or social dominance. Humans were different. They had evolved on a planet where survival required constant adaptation to changing conditions. Instead of developing one successful strategy and sticking to it, humans had learned to change their approach based on whatever worked in each specific situation. This flexibility made them almost impossible for other species to understand or predict. Commander Yu Sang-min, working with Dr. Shin's research, developed what became known as the Impossible Victory Protocol. The system was based on a simple principle that alien military thinking always followed logical patterns, while human thinking could abandon logic entirely when logic was not useful. The protocol's first major test came during the siege of Kepler Station, a human outpost that was surrounded by the Thalaxian Republic's elite assault force. The aliens had positioned their ships in a perfect blockade formation that should have made escape or reinforcement impossible. According to every military manual in the galaxy, the humans should have surrendered within days. Instead, Commander Yu convinced the entire Thalaxian fleet that they had accidentally surrounded a planet-sized theme park rather than a military installation. His psychological warfare team created fake advertisements for attractions, like the galaxy's most dangerous roller coaster and the authentic human combat experience where visitors could participate in simulated battles. The deception was so convincing that Thalaxian officers began requesting permission to visit the theme park during their off-duty hours. Some alien soldiers started collecting souvenir t-shirts and taking photographs with human defenders who they believed were actors playing military personnel. The siege continued for months, but it had transformed from a military operation into a tourist destination. The aliens became so invested in the theme park fiction that they began paying admission fees to experience different attractions. Human defenders would stage elaborate battle sequences complete with special effects and dramatic dialogue. The Thalaxians were having so much fun that they forgot they were supposed to be conducting a siege. Lieutenant Colonel Kwon Min-young took Dr. Shin's psychological research even further by creating the Warfare as Performance Art Division. Her theory was that humans could win any battle by making their enemies question whether they were participating in combat or watching entertainment. Her first major operation involved defending the mining colony on Titan VII from attack by the Nexari Empire. Instead of preparing traditional defensive positions, her unit staged what appeared to be a massive theatrical production. The colony's main street became a stage where human soldiers performed elaborate musical numbers about the joys of space mining. The Nexari assault force arrived expecting to face desperate defenders. Instead, they found themselves watching a Broadway-style musical complete with choreographed dance numbers and catchy songs about the importance of asteroid extraction. The aliens were so entertained that they forgot to actually attack the colony. The performance included audience participation segments where Nexari soldiers were invited on stage to learn traditional human mining songs. Some aliens became so enthusiastic about the show that they began helping with costume changes and set construction. The invasion turned into the most successful cultural exchange program in galactic history. Dr. Shin's research revealed that the key to human military success was not superior technology or strategy, but the ability to redefine what conflict meant. Different alien species approached warfare as a competition to be won through strength, cunning, or resources. Humans approached warfare as a creative challenge that could be solved through imagination and flexibility. The psychological impact was cumulative. Each time aliens encountered human forces, they became less certain about what to expect. Previous experience with human tactics was actually counterproductive because humans never used the same approach twice. Enemy commanders who thought they understood human strategy would find themselves facing completely different methods that made their preparations useless. The galaxy's military academies began offering courses in human unpredictability theory, but the classes only made the problem worse. The more alien officers studied human tactics, the more confused they became. Human military doctrine seemed to be based on the principle that having no consistent doctrine was itself a form of doctrine. Professor Im Dong-wook at the Academy of Unconventional Warfare developed the theoretical framework that explained why human tactics were so effective against alien thinking. He called it the chaos advantage, and it was based on the idea that predictable enemies were always vulnerable to unpredictable attacks. The framework identified three key principles that made humans successful in galactic warfare. First, aliens always tried to understand their enemies before fighting them, but humans were designed to be incomprehensible. Second, aliens believed that effective strategies should be repeatable, but humans created new strategies for every situation. Third, aliens assumed that military operations should follow logical patterns, but humans could abandon logic whenever it was inconvenient. The psychological warfare applications were revolutionary. Dr. Shin's team developed techniques for making alien commanders doubt their own perceptions of reality. Enemy officers would begin questioning whether what they were experiencing was actually happening, or whether they were hallucinating, dreaming, or being subjected to some form of mind control. The most effective technique involved creating situations so bizarre that aliens would assume they were suffering from mental illness, rather than accept that humans had actually done something impossible. This led to enemy commanders removing themselves from battle, not because they were physically defeated, but because they believed they were no longer mentally competent to command. The Galactic Medical Association eventually established special treatment facilities for military officers suffering from human confusion syndrome. The facilities were always overcrowded because every species that fought humans produced new cases of officers who could no longer function after exposure to human tactical thinking. Dr. Shin's final research paper, titled "The Impossibility of Fighting an Impossible Enemy," became required reading at every military academy in the galaxy. It explained that humans had accidentally discovered the ultimate form of psychological warfare by simply being themselves. Their natural creativity and adaptability made them appear supernatural to species that had evolved more predictable behavioral patterns. The paper concluded that the only effective defense against human tactics was to avoid fighting humans entirely. Any species that engaged in conflict with humans would eventually suffer psychological damage that would make their military forces less effective against all enemies, not just humans. This research led to the most important strategic development in galactic history. Instead of trying to defeat humans through military force, other species began looking for ways to coexist peacefully with them. The psychological cost of fighting humans had become higher than the potential benefits of victory. Dr. Shin had transformed the study of human warfare from a military science into a form of psychology that explained why some conflicts could not be won through traditional means. Her work proved that the human advantage in galactic warfare was not based on superior weapons or tactics, but on a fundamentally different way of thinking about what conflict meant. The galaxy was learning that fighting humans was not just militarily dangerous, but psychologically hazardous. The species that had once considered themselves the masters of warfare were discovering that they were not prepared for enemies who treated warfare as a form of creative expression. 5 years after first contact, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no species could have predicted. The old system of conquest through superior firepower had become completely obsolete, because humans had proven that creativity could defeat any conventional military advantage. Ambassador Lee Sohee now represented Earth in the newly formed Galactic Council of Unconventional Solutions, where problems were solved through methods that would have been considered insane just a few years earlier. The Council's headquarters were located on a neutral space station that had been designed by human architects working with alien engineers. The result was a building that looked like someone had mixed a government office with an art museum and a playground. Every meeting room was equipped with toys, puzzles, and craft supplies, because humans had discovered that creative problem solving worked better when people could fidget with objects while thinking. The first major crisis handled by the Council involved the centuries-old war between the Methri and Galvani empires. These two species had been fighting over territory for so long that neither side could remember what had started the conflict. Their battle fleets met regularly in space, shooting at each other with the mechanical precision of clockwork, while diplomats issued formal protests that everyone ignored. Traditional peace negotiations had failed dozens of times because both species approached diplomacy the same way. They approached warfare with rigid protocols and predictable strategies. Human mediator Judge Park Jin-woo realized that the conflict would never end as long as both sides continued thinking about it in military terms instead of organizing formal peace talks. Judge Park announced that the Galactic Council would sponsor the first ever intergalactic cooking competition. The rules were simple. Representatives from both empires would work together in mixed teams to create fusion cuisine that combined ingredients and techniques from their respective worlds. The winning team would receive a trophy and bragging rights throughout the galaxy. The Methri and Galvani were suspicious. At first, they had spent centuries trying to destroy each other, and now they were being asked to collaborate on making food. But the human organizers made participation voluntary and offered prizes that appealed to both species' cultural values. The competition would be broadcast throughout the galaxy, giving the participants a chance to showcase their civilizations. What happened next surprised everyone, including the humans. The Methri and Galvani discovered that they were both passionate about cooking and had strong opinions about proper seasoning techniques. Within hours of beginning the competition, they were arguing more intensely about salt measurements than they had ever argued about territorial boundaries. The arguments were fierce, but they were creative rather than destructive. Instead of trying to eliminate their opponents, the competing teams were trying to convince them that their approach to food preparation was superior. The passion was the same, but the context had completely changed. The meaning Captain Oh Tae-young commanded the new galactic peacekeeping force, a mixed-species military unit trained in human-style unconventional tactics. Their most effective peacekeeping tool was something called confusion deployment, which involved showing up at conflict zones and doing things so unexpected that both sides would stop fighting just to figure out what the peacekeepers were trying to accomplish. The technique's first major success came during a territorial dispute between two mining companies that had escalated into actual warfare. Both sides had hired mercenary fleets and were preparing for a battle that would have destroyed several valuable asteroid fields instead of trying to separate the opposing forces. Captain O's peacekeepers arrived at the conflict zone and began hosting what appeared to be a massive space carnival. The peacekeeping ships were decorated with bright lights and carnival music was broadcasting on all frequencies. Fake carnival rides had been constructed on several asteroids, and human peacekeepers dressed as carnival workers were offering games and prizes to anyone who wanted to participate. The entire war zone had been transformed into an amusement park. The opposing mercenary fleets were completely baffled. They had been hired to fight a war but instead found themselves invited to participate in carnival games. The peacekeepers offered prizes for activities like asteroid ring toss and zero-gravity bumper cars. Both sides became so distracted by the carnival that they forgot why they had been fighting. The galaxy's most feared military unit became the Human Cultural Exchange Corps, led by General Kim Hyojin. This group consisted entirely of former teachers, artists, and entertainers who had discovered that they could end wars by introducing alien species to human. Concepts like practical jokes, competitive sports, and improvisational comedy. Their most successful operation involved ending a three-way conflict between species that had been fighting over water rights on a disputed planet. Instead of mediating negotiations about resource allocation, the Cultural Exchange Corps introduced all three species to water. Balloon fights and slip and slide competitions. The aliens became so enthusiastic about water-based recreational activities that they began working together to build elaborate water parks and swimming facilities. The planet that had been a source of conflict became a vacation destination where representatives from all three species would come to relax and play water games together. The transformation of galactic civilization was not just political but philosophical. Species across the galaxy began to realize that the universe was far more interesting when approached with curiosity and creativity rather than conquest and control. Human universities started accepting alien students who wanted to learn what professors called impossible thinking. Impossible thinking was the human ability to find solutions that should not work. But somehow did students learn to approach problems by first identifying what everyone assumed was impossible, then figuring out ways to make the impossible happen anyway. The curriculum included courses like Creative Logic, Advanced Confusion, Theory and Applied Nonsense. The most popular class was called Warfare, as game design taught by Professor Lim Soo-jin, who had been a video game developer before becoming a military theorist. Students learned to think about conflicts like game designers, creating challenges that would be fun to solve rather than problems that needed to be eliminated. The old galactic motto had been Strength Through Unity, which emphasized the importance of everyone working together toward common goals. The new motto, suggested by former street performer Turn